If you ever wanted to know what finally pushed Janelle to step out of the shadows, this is it. For years, audiences watched her keep calm, steady, and patient through the kind of family storms most people would never survive. Janelle was always the quiet bridge in the chaos, the one who smoothed the rough edges, kept the peace, and tried her hardest to believe things would somehow work themselves out. But on one quiet afternoon in Flagstaff, everything changed. The air was still, the house was quiet, uncommonly so. And sitting in the middle of the living room table was a single dot object that would shift the entire direction of the Brown family. Knope, a phone already recording. Janelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a dramatic announcement. She simply hit record, sat down across from her kids, and said the words that would echo far beyond that room. We need to talk, and I want the truth saved exactly as it is. Her children froze. They knew that their mother did not record anything unless it mattered. And this, what followed, was the most honest, emotional, and raw family meeting the Browns had ever had. Sans cameras, producers, and TLC crafting the moment. And when Kody eventually learned that every word was captured, every pause, every tremble, every confession, his reaction wasn't just loud. It was something nobody expected. And the kind of reaction that makes you stop, rewind, and wonder how things reached this point. The kind of reaction that finally reveals what's been bubbling under the surface for years. This is the story viewers have whispered about for months. The hidden meeting that pulled back the curtain and changed everything. It began with a short message in the family group chat. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just a single line from Janelle. I need everybody who can come tonight. Just family, no TLC. Something in the simplicity of those words stopped her kids in their tracks. Janelle wasn't one who demanded attention. She didn't call last-minute family meetings. She didn't make requests unless they truly mattered. And the moment that message popped up, every one of her children felt the same quiet tug in their chests. Something was different. A few minutes later, she followed the message with a voice note, steady, calm, but firm. Even through the small speakers of their phones, her kids could hear a tone they weren't used to. It wasn't anger, it wasn't stress, it was resolve. A kind of strength she had kept tucked away for far too long. Word spread quickly. Mom wants a meeting. Tonight? No cameras? By 5 o'clock, they already knew they'd all be there. By low PM, the living room felt fuller than it had in years. Hunter leaned against the doorway, arms folded over his chest. Gabriel sat on the front edge of the couch, quietly tapping his thumb against his knee. Garrison stood near the bookshelf, pacing slowly as he tried to sort out his thoughts. Savannah sat on the small bench near the window, her fingers curled around a mug of tea hadn't touched. Even Christine joined from Utah via video call, her face softly lit from a tablet propped in the middle of the coffee table. She gave an encouraging smile as more of Janelle's kids came into the room. But however well-known these faces were, something in the gathering felt off. Normally, these were times filled with chatter, jokes, and the kind of busy noise that comes from siblings catching up. Tonight, however, the silence was heavy in the air. It wasn't uncomfortable, just serious, like everyone was bracing themselves for something long overdue. When Janelle finally entered into the living room, everything in that room shifted. She wasn't racing around. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't tired or scattered like she had so often been in recent years. She walked in with a calm, steady presence, like someone who had made a decision and was ready to stand by it. Her eyes moved around the room slowly, taking in her children, each one carrying their own quiet hurt, their own unspoken question. And for a moment, she simply stood there breathing deeply, grounding herself. Then she sat at the central table. And before her was a basic smartphone. No tripod, no microphone, no notes, just the phone. She reached forward, pressed the red button, and set it down gently as the recording screen lit up. Her voice was calm but firm. We're recording this. I want honesty today. A few children exchanged surprised glances. Hunter stood upright. Savannah's eyes widened a little. Even Christine on the screen lifted her eyebrows in a soft flash of surprise. Janelle had never done anything like this before. She wasn't one to record conversation. She wasn't one to approach things head-on. She usually kept peace even when it meant sacrificing her own voice. But tonight, her tone told a different story. A shift moved through the room. You could almost feel it, the way a quiet threshold had been crossed. This was not a casual conversation. This wasn't a family talk. This was documentation, a record of truth, something permanent, something she didn't want to be erased, reshaped, or misunderstood later. And as she sat there, shoulders squared, hands folded gently in her lap, It became clear to every person present that whatever had brought her to this moment, it had taken time, strength, and a great deal of reflection. For the first time in a long time, Janelle didn't look like the peacemaker or the mediator. She looked like a woman ready to speak for herself, ready to be heard, ready to stop letting things slide, ready. It was silent in the room as she took another look around, looking into each of her children's eyes one after another. On her face, there was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet, steady determination. We're kidding, a mother who had decided enough was enough. Finally, she exhaled slowly and said, "Yo, thank you for coming. We need to talk, all of us." Okay? And in that moment, everyone in the room knew, this night was going to change everything. The conversation didn't explode. It didn't start with shouting or frustration. Like, it began with something far more powerful, gentle honesty. Janelle leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on her knees, her voice steady but with a heft to it that everyone in the room could feel. She didn't hurry and didn't stumble. She spoke with the careful, measured tone of someone who had carried these thoughts for far. Pray fort, place, promens. Was Sievermeister Fries, too long someone who had rehearsed them in quiet moments, unsure of when she would finally have the courage to speak them aloud. I wanted to start by saying this isn't about blame, she began, her eyes moving slowly from one child to another. This is about how things have felt, not just this year, but for a long time. The room was silent, almost reverent. No one looked away, she continued, her tone soft but clear. There's been a distance growing in this family, and I've tried to tell myself it wasn't real. I've tried to explain it away. But it's changed us, it's changed me. She spoke of holidays, of how they changed from warm group gatherings to quiet days of uncertainty, waiting to see who would show up and who wouldn't. She spoke of missed birthdays, of times of joy that have now been substituted with belated messages or no messages at all. She spoke of family traditions that were once the heartbeat of the Browns, traditions that had gradually faded until there was little evidence that they had ever existed. And the houses she began, her voice thinning, used to feel like homes that connected us. Now they feel like separate worlds. Her children exchanged furtive, knowing glances. They had felt it too. Maybe even more deeply than she realized. And then Janelle said what everybody had been thinking but was afraid to say: "We don't feel included anymore." Not truly, the sentence hung in the air, a truth that finally had a place to land. Hunter bowed his head. Garrison's jaw tightened. Savannah blinked hard, her eyes turning glassy. These were not small complaints. Those were the years of slow-growing hurt, finally finding a voice. The kids started talking one after the other, not loud, not angry, with the soft exhaustion of those who had tried to stay strong for too long. They had discussed calls not returned, messages not read, plans canceled at the last minute. And they talked of moments when they felt like guests instead of children, like visitors instead of family. Yeah, each story was its own small heartbreak, and then Christine's voice came through the tablet, warm but firm. She leaned slightly toward the camera, her expression thoughtful. "This isn't new," she said gently. "It's a pattern, and it keeps hurting the same people over and over again." Her words weren't an attack, they were acknowledged, something Janelle's kids had needed for a long time. Just hearing another adult say it out loud brought an unexpected sense of relief. The room was utterly silent, not tense, just full of truth, the kind of truth that doesn't have to be shouted to hit hard. Janelle folded her hands and looked down for a moment, collecting herself. You could see the weight she had been carrying, years of trying to smooth things over, trying to stay neutral, trying to be the balance in a family that didn't always stay balanced. Then, from the edge of the couch, Gabriel leaned forward. He wasn't emotional often, and when he spoke, his voice was low but firm. "Yoke, Mom," he said, "you're always the one holding this family together. You're always trying to fix things. But who's holding you?" The question cut through the room like a beam of light. Slowly, Janelle looked up. Her eyes were soft and tired. She blinked once, then twice, and exhaled a long, deep breath. Shh. It wasn't a breakdown, it wasn't even sadness, it was release. A moment where she finally allowed herself to be seen, not just as the strong one, but as a person who had needs too. The children were not blaming her, but recognizing her. Yaliel, seeing her, supporting her. The emotion in the room shifted. It no longer felt like a meeting. That felt like a long overdue healing. Christine, who watched from the screen, placed her hand over her heart. "Janelle," she said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Janelle nodded, still quiet, still steady, but lighter than she had looked in years. And everyone in that room knew this, right here. That was the reason why the meeting had to take place. Not to accuse, not to separate, but to finally speak the truth they had all been living with in silence. As the meeting deepened, something subtle, powerful shifted in the room. At first, the phone sitting on the table had been nothing more than a tool, just a small device recording words for clarity later. But slowly, quietly, it took on a different feeling. The red recording light pulsed softly, and it seemed that everyone was thinking the same thing. This wasn't just a phone anymore. It was a witness, Gusing, a silent observer capturing what the family had never been able to say when emotions ran too high or memories became tangled. It recorded every small pause, every sigh, every shaky inhale before someone admitted something they had buried deep inside. Janelle listened to her kids speak, her hands folded together in her lap. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to soften or explain. She just listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time, without bearing the pressure to defend anyone or smooth the situation over. Oh, she wasn't recording out of anger or resentment. She wasn't gathering ammunition. She was trying to create clarity in a family that had been confused, divided, and overwhelmed by mixed messages for years. And when she started to speak again, everybody leaned forward ever so slightly. "I want to talk about something that's been weighing on me for a long time," she said calmly. "It's about Coyote Pass." The children looked at one another. This wasn't small talk. This was the heart of a major fracture, Janelle continued, her voice steady but tired. "And I've tried to understand the decisions being made. I've tried to support every shift and change. But the plans keep changing, the goals keep changing, and I feel like my input hasn't mattered." She wasn't accusing, she was explaining. She spoke of times when she felt they were all working to the same vision, only to discover that new plans had been made without her. She spoke about financial confusion, the missing details, the sudden changes in direction. "It's like I'm part of the family," she said gently, "but not part of the decisions." The kids nodded. They had seen it too, how she had carried the responsibilities, stress, the weight of uncertainty often, without clear answers from the one person who should have been transparent with her. Then the children took turns telling their own stories. Stories of being overlooked, stories of conversations where they felt judged, stories of trying to connect yet feeling like they were standing on the outside looking in. None were dramatic stories, small, quiet moments that hurt simply because they happened over and over again. Hunter spoke about invitations that seemed like afterthoughts. Garrison talked about trying to talk to his father and feeling brushed off. In Kekin, he shared how sometimes he felt his opinion did not matter at all, and the small phone registered the truth without judgment, without bias every time. Then, in the middle of the give and take, came a surprise. Until then, Savannah had been quiet, almost invisible in the corner. She sat up straighter, with hands pressed against her mug, and eyes that glanced up shining bright with hurt and courage. She began softly, her voice trembling, "I just don't want to feel forgotten again." Gentle words, yet they struck the room with the emotional power of an earthquake. Janelle breathed in sharply. Gabriel's shoulders slumped. Hunter closed his eyes. Even through the tablet, Christine raised her hand to her mouth in emotion. And then Christine wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and whispered, "Sweet girl." Nobody hastened to fill the silence. Nobody tried to talk over her moment. The stillness in the room wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. A quiet pause that finally let the weight of Savannah's truth set in, without excuses or interruption. And in this instant, everyone realized something important. This recording wasn't about proving someone wrong. It wasn't about catching mistakes. It was not about exposing anyone. And it was about preserving the truths they were saying at this very moment. Truths that, over the years, had been pushed aside, minimized, or even forgotten. And it was about making sure that emotional experiences of these kids and this mother were finally heard clearly and permanently. As Christine watched them from the tablet, she nodded slowly, almost to herself. "This needed to happen," she said quietly. "This conversation. It's been waiting a long time," and she was right. Yalen, for years, feelings had been tucked away, covered with positivity, or left unspoken because the family didn't want to stir conflict. But here, in this living room, under the soft glow of the lamp and the unblinking eye of the phone, those truths finally had space to breathe. And for the first time, the Browns weren't talking in circles, they were being truthful, and the phone, quiet, steady, recording it all, became the witness they never knew they needed. By morning, the air around the house felt different. The quiet confidence Janelle carried from the meeting still lingered, and her kids moved around with the calmness that comes after finally telling the truth. But outside that house, another storm had already started to build. For some time late that night, word reached Kody. Nobody knew who told him first. Maybe a sibling mentioned it, maybe someone messed up in a message somewhere, and maybe Christine's video call wasn't as private as they thought. All they knew was this. Kody showed up the next day fast. The door opened, and he stepped inside with an expression the family hadn't seen in years, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a kind of rattled confusion not quite fitting in with his characteristic confidence. He wasn't furious, he wasn't shouting, he was dumbfounded, and that was almost more unsettling. For a moment, he just stood by the doorway, taking in the huddle of kids on the living room floor. Then Janelle, still seated serenely at the table. There was that same phone from the night before sitting next to her elbow. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You all had a meeting, and it was recorded?" He did not ask why the meeting happened. He didn't ask how long it lasted. Again, he had one thing in mind, the recording. She regarded him with the same steady expression she'd worn the night before. She didn't appear scared. She didn't appear overwhelmed. She looked grounded. "Yes," she responded, "we recorded it." Kody stepped forward, confusion building on his face. "Why?" His voice had risen, not in anger, but in incredulity. Why would you need to record your own family? Why would you need to record your own family?" The kids shifted slightly. The tension grew thicker, but Janelle didn't look away. She didn't fidget or stumble. She answered with a calm, almost quiet firmness that struck everyone in the room, including Kody, "Because every time we talk, you forget what we said." The words hung in the space between them, soft but undeniable, and Kody's expression flipped on its head. Not from anger, but from being caught off guard. He wasn't ready for this version of Janelle, steady, confident, and unwilling to downplay her truth. He blinked, shook his head slightly, and began explaining himself the way he always did when he felt cornered. "Kate, I wasn't forgetting," he said quickly. "I was overwhelmed. I felt blindsided. I felt like decisions were being made without me. Things were being twisted." His voice grew louder, not aggressive, just desperate to be understood. You made it sound like I don't care," he continued. "Like I'm not trying. And that's not fair. And that's not fair. You know that's not fair." But as he talked, something else became clear. For years, Kody had used passion to steer conversations, fast talking, emotional tone, shifting the focus. It always worked. It always moved the family back into his frame of the story, but not today. Because today there was a witness on the table, a record of the truth. Janelle didn't interrupt. She let him go on, until his words at last began to slow, until the energy in his tone ebbed into a quieter frustration. And then she raised her hand and slowly pointed at the telephone. "Ain bienda." "If that's true," she said softly, "then the recording should clear it up." There was no challenge in her tone, no sarcasm, no anger, just clarity. And for the first time that day, and maybe for the first time in years, Kody didn't have anything to say. His mouth opened, but then his lips clamped shut. His eyes darted to the phone, and then back to Janelle. A slow tightening of his shoulders preceded the dawning realization. This time, he couldn't reshape the conversation. He couldn't tell the story his way. He couldn't walk away and say he remembered a different life. There was evidence, clear, accurate, unedited, and that changed everything. He sank into the armchair, rubbing his hands together with slow, circular motions. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than it had been, almost fragile. "Hey, I never thought you'd feel the need to do this," he said quietly. "It feels strange." Janelle nodded slowly. "I know," she said, "but I needed clarity, and so did the kids." The room was still while he absorbed that. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't arguing, he wasn't storming out. His reaction wasn't loud at all. It was unreal, because in that moment he realized something he had never expected. The story wasn't in his control anymore. Not this time, not today. And for the first time, he had to face the truth precisely as it was spoken. The next morning arrived gently, the soft sunlight slipping through the kitchen blinds and settling across the counter. It was the kind of quiet morning Janelle had always loved, simple, still, honest. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, lightness. She moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast as she always did, but her shoulders didn't carry the same weight. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't bracing herself for another emotional twist. Instead, each small task, whisking eggs, warming the pan, slicing fruit, felt calm, almost peaceful. Her kids joined her one by one, still sleepy, but their energy was different too. There was no tension in the room, no guarded glances, no unspoken questions. They spoke candidly with each other, sharing small stories and jokes, the kind of warm conversation Janelle once thought they had lost for good. For a moment, it felt like the old days before division, before distance, before the long, confusing years when the family seemed to drift in different directions without even realizing it. Breakfast wasn't just any meal. It was a quiet reminder the meeting had done something important. It hadn't created conflict. It hadn't torn anyone apart. It had brought the family closer together than they had been in years. Late in the morning, the house quieted once more. The kids headed out to run errands and get to work, leaving Janelle a minute to catch her breath. She poured herself a cup of tea, then headed to the back porch, plopping down into her favorite chair. The mountains, tall and stately, wore morning light out in the distance. Above them, the sky sprawled, calm and clear. She took a long sip of tea before picking up her phone and pressing play. The recording from the night before started softly. The voices, her own, her children's, filled the quiet porch. But she wasn't listening for argument. She wasn't listening for moments she could critique or revisit. She was listening for something far more meaningful: courage. Each voice in the recording carried a truth that had taken years to say aloud. Each pause was meaningful. Every shaky breath carried years of held back emotion. Every sentence was a piece of a story they all shared. And for the first time in a very long time, Janelle heard her family with clarity, through honesty, not chaos or confusion. It was then that she understood that this recording wasn't about capturing evidence. It wasn't about defending herself. It wasn't even about confronting Kody. It was about finally speaking what had been unsaid. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. All she needed was her truth spoken out loud. That truth, raw, calm, human, was enough. As she continued to listen, she heard her children's voices again, their fears, their frustrations, their hopes, their love. She hadn't realized how much they had been holding in, how much they had silently carried while trying to be strong for one another. Their honesty was a gift she hadn't expected, but one she needed more than she realized. The recording reached the point where Savannah spoke, her soft voice trembling but brave. "I just don't want to feel forgotten again." Janelle closed her eyes and let the words settle. Her daughter had spoken from a place of deep truth, not anger, not resentment, but a simple desire to feel seen and valued. That kind of honesty could only come in a moment where safety had finally returned. Janelle took a deep breath and paused the recording. She let the silence envelop her for a moment. The sun warmed her face. A soft breeze stirred through the trees. For the first time in years, she felt centered, steady in her own life, steady in her role as a mother, steady in the truth she now understood. She had done the right thing. This recording wasn't about outing Kody. It was not about taking sides. It wasn't even about proving a point. It was about opening a door to a new chapter, one built on clarity, confidence, and mutual respect. A chapter where her kids felt heard, where she felt supported, and where the family's future didn't depend on confusion, but on honesty. She leaned back in her chair, letting the mountains fill her view, letting the quiet mornings settle around her like a soft blanket. "She waya and amatha doubt till inane," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. "We will be okay." And this time, she didn't just hope it, she believed it, because something had shifted firmly, finally, and unmistakably. It was the point beyond which nobody could turn back.